Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode by the Planet Policy Pals podcast. I'm Ajwa, and I'm joined here with my fellow co-host, Ala. Hey girl, how you doing?
I'm okay. Hi everybody. Hey Ajwa, what's up?
Not much. Okay, so we're halfway through our disaster gloom and doom series. We really hope you guys are enjoying it, and please, we want to hear from you on our social media.
Yep.
Please don't forget to leave your review. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know anything else that you would really like to hear, because we got you. Speaking of hearing from you, shout out to Mike for talking about coal, because last week we did mention rising crisis that we've seen with coal around the world due to this inflation problem, because of this supply chain issue, because of a pandemic. I don't know, the world is dying, guys. But yeah, no, speaking of coal, we have seen India at COP26 pledge that they're going to go for zero emissions in 2070, which is about 50 years from now. But currently, they actually have no plans to cut it down, to reduce their usage of coal. In fact, they plan to further explore their coal resources and even see if they can export them. However, they are planning to lower the GHG emissions by lowering the ash content of the coal so that they can reduce pollution. But that's really optimizing the process and not really eradicating it. And unfortunately, we don't know if that's going to be enough. Ala, what do you think about it?
I mean, we have to be pragmatic and we have to consider the people living there and the resources that they need. So I will say that coal is India's largest employer. This does not mean that greener energy could also employ people. But right now it's a resource that they have a lot of, and it is so big that about 70% of the energy used by the 1.3 billion people in India comes from coal. And it even subsidizes their railways. Now, I know that they are trying to have more electric vehicles. They're trying to make certain things cleaner. But at the end of the day, most of their power comes from coal. And while they're the third largest polluter after China and the US, we also have to consider that they're probably going to rise up because their energy needs are going to far outweigh the US over the next 20 years and possibly China as well. And they're just in a development phase with more development to come. And if you consider how many people are in India, I mean, it's a lot of people. That means that the nation's carbon emissions are going to continue to skyrocket, even with these processes they're trying to optimize. And I know they're trying to offset it, like I said, with using electric where they can and introducing some alternative energy aspects. But the reality remains that because of the size of India and because of the fact that coal is currently so abundant, it is going to take very rash and aggressive exploration in other areas. And of course, it's not just the government. It needs to tie in the private sector and of course tie in incentives for investment in cleaner energy. I think that will get India where they're trying to be in this regard. But yeah, that 2070 goal, I don't even know if they'll meet it if they don't make these aggressive changes, if they don't start now.
Plus, with such a big industrial country, I think there's a lot of space for them to move away from coal.
I think they can, but the truth is they have to start doing it now while the industrial sector in their country is developing and booming. This is the best time to do it. Trying to fit it retroactively is going to be much more difficult when you consider the population. But I also don't trust Modi in general. I just don't trust the man. So I don't know.
We really hope that Modi can really deliver on his promises that he's been making at all these big summits. But Modi really does know how to win an audience, if nothing else.
If nothing else. We'll see who the BJP puts in next, because I think we all know that the BJP is going to win again in India. I'm sorry, guys. It's the reality we're facing, okay?
Yeah.
Shout out to all our Indian listeners. You guys are one of our most loyal bases after Pakistan and Nigeria and America. But you guys are right there, and we wish you...
You want to name some other countries?
I'm just saying they're up there, and we appreciate it. So we do hope that things improve for the sake of these wonderful people who support us.
We do. Coming back to today's episode, we will be talking about, of course, another disaster that happened in Seveso, Italy, back in 1976. It was an unforeseeable accident that happened in northern Italy that led to an environmental contamination with caustic reaction products and 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzyl P-dioxin, which is also commonly known as dioxin. This is a part of it. The original contamination of vegetation was in the order of 0.5 ppm TCDD, and by the end of 1976, we saw that the contamination had been transferred to the soil, where TCDD was strongly absorbed and it reduced bioavailability. Now, the reason why I'm excited to hear about this topic, because of course it's a doom and gloom topic, so why wouldn't I be? And also it's an industrial disaster that happened because of negligence on everybody's part, really. But Allah is here to tell us in detail about what really happened and who we can hold accountable. So you have the floor, Allah. Take it away.
Sure thing. Thank you, Ajwa. Before we start, I just want to say, I'm going to let you guys decide if this really is unforeseeable, because everyone describes it as that. And we can agree whether or not they could have seen this coming or not seen it coming. It's a tricky one. First of all, Seveso is a town and commune in the province of Monza and Brianza in the region of Lombardy in Italy. So it's traditionally been based around like the furniture industry, and it was at the time of this accident. Currently, its population is 23,456, and in 1976, it was roughly 17,000. It's always been kind of an artisan region, and at the time, there was some personal animal rearing, and it's much more urban now, even though it's still a fairly small town. So this is the site of the disaster. That's why it's the Seveso disaster.
Were there no neighboring places that were affected, or did Seveso take the cake?
So yeah, it makes sense, right, that other areas would get affected since it's just a small part of a bigger area. And it wasn't, you're right. It's not the only town that was affected. And the plant where the accident actually occurred was located in Meda. But it's not called the Meda disaster, even though it didn't happen in Seveso, because Seveso received the most damage due to a cloud that drifted over there because of the winds. Other affected neighboring communities were Meda, where the tragedy happened, Desio, Cesano Maderno, and to a lesser extent, Barlacina and Bovicio Masciago. This is also not the most severe release of dioxin ever, but it's a notable point in history because of everything that happened after this disaster. Speaking of the disaster, let's get into it. In 1963, this big company called Hoffmann La Roche, which is now just the Roche Group or Roche Group, I don't know, guys, check the show notes for spelling and pronunciation. Hoffmann La Roche purchased a company that made fragrances, pharmaceuticals, cosmetic soaps, all that stuff called Givaudan. So that company needed a substance, which is 2,4,5-trichlorophenol, and that's used to actually make hexachlorophene, which is an ingredient in things like medical soaps and also in herbicide. Givaudan used the hexachlorophene for their cosmetics and their antiseptic soaps. So they got a small company called Icmesa in Meda near Milan to make the hexachlorophene. And this is where the chaos began. Just to be clear, it starts with La Roche, goes to Givaudan, and then Icmesa. So that also made this really complicated. Unlike some of the other chemical accidents we've discussed on the show, and I think we've discussed 3 or 4 of them, this plant did not make anyone uncomfortable. They weren't worried about it. There had never been a big accident before at this plant. There was no news from the plant. So it just wasn't expected in this area. I guess that's why people describe it as unforeseen. So the process the parent company selected was a method that had used ethylene glycol as a solvent. And this particular method had seen accidents in other places. In fact, the same kind of accident occurred at a plant using ethylene glycol somewhere else owned by the parent company in 1968. But the people there didn't really know about that. And also this particular plant had never had an accident. So also the people working there, they just didn't think it was a problem, I guess. So at approximately 12:37 on Saturday, 10th July 1976, a bursting disc on a chemical reactor ruptured, and that's kind of how the whole thing started. So maintenance staff heard a whistling sound and a cloud of vapor was venting from the roof. There was a dense white cloud, and it had considerable altitude. So with the wind, it started to drift. There were safety operating procedure issues, reactor design issues, relief and vent system problems that weren't designed right, poor product testing, a plant design problem, no emergency response plan, and my biggest pet peeve, guys, as you may have been able to tell from the other preceding episodes, improper temperature monitoring on the reactor, which I will never get over.
So wait, you're telling me that there were no checks and balances for this plant to be operating with? Like, there's a lot of negligence. Like, where's the chief operator? Where are these people?
I know, right? Exactly. So the thing you have to realize about this disaster is like, this is when we finally started realizing, you know what, guys, dioxin really is a problem. And it was after this disaster, it's kind of sad to see, but it was this disaster that led to that discovery. Because they hadn't had any major accidents at this plant, there was no correct knowledge among the researchers and the factory managers about this runaway reaction. It wasn't even something that they thought about dioxin being generated. They didn't consider that. And it was thanks to I hate to say it like this, but yes, after Seveso happened, and of course the whole Agent Orange debacle with dioxin being used in the Vietnamese War by the US, that people started saying, you know what, guys, dioxin might not be really good for people or the environment. That's kind of what happened here. Not to mention, like I said, they just didn't bother about it because they hadn't had no big incidents.
Convenient, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of runaway reaction, the reaction that they were working on should have been carried out at a temperature above what was achievable using the normal process available at the plant. So somebody, they do not say who, decided to use the exhaust steam from the on-site electricity generation turbine to drive up the temperature. So what they did was they took the exhaust steam, they passed that around an external heating coil installed on the chemical reactor vessel, and that's how they pushed up the temperature to get the reaction that they wanted. The exhaust steam pressure was normally at 12 bar and temperature 190 degrees Celsius, which resulted in a reaction mixture temperature of about 158 degrees Celsius, which is very close to the boiling point of the intermediary that they were making, and that boiling point is 160 degrees Celsius. So the safety testing that they had done, because there was a little bit of testing at least, showed the onset of an exothermic side reaction if the reaction mixture reached 230 degrees Celsius. But they didn't worry about this because they were like, well, we can barely get it up to 158 without passing extra exhaust steam, so this is not going to be a problem. The one thing I should say, though, is that, again, like I said earlier, there was no steam temperature reading made available to the plant operators responsible for this reactor. So they didn't actually measure the temperature of the steam that they passed from that exhaust, like that exhaust steam, they didn't get the temperature of that. They just checked the temperature in the reactor from time to time.
Again, where are these safety inspections? Like, are we serious? First off, you're using an exhaust from somewhere else, from a completely different system, to heat this reaction up, and you still don't want to check what it's operating at. Okay.
I know, right? So the thing here is like this exhaust steam thing was kind of a makeshift solution. But unfortunately, it didn't have any temperature reading itself. As far as safety inspections go, it was, again, after this disaster that hazardous safety reporting in Europe became a real thing. And that's when they actually made new directives. They even named it after this tragedy. It's called the Seveso Directive. And that's when they started to require operators of major hazardous establishments to draw up safety reports, which then have to be updated after relevant changes at least every 5 years. Before this, we didn't have that in Europe.
So something good did come out of it, right? At least.
Yeah. Kind of messed up, but yeah. So the chemical release accident occurred again when that batch process was interrupted prior to the completion of the final step. When they remove ethylene glycol from the reaction mixture by distillation, that's when everything went wrong. And they have to do this because Italian law requires them to shut down plant operations over the weekend. They can't just leave it running. So other parts of the site had already started to close down as the processing of the batches finished, which reduced the power consumption across the plant. Because they reduced the power consumption across the plant, what then happened, similar to, I guess this happened in Chernobyl, something like this with the turbines, there was a dramatic drop in the load on the turbine. So it caused the temperature to spike, and then the exhaust steam went to like 300 degrees Celsius, something they discovered later. If there was temperature monitoring on that exhaust steam, it's something that they would have noticed immediately. But I guess nobody shut it off before. This much hotter steam then proceeded to heat the portion of the metal wall of the reactor. And that's when the accident occurred, because the level of the liquid inside rose to the same temperature. Like I said, they didn't have any steam temperature reading among their instruments. So the operators didn't even know this was happening with the additional heating. And they just stopped the batch reaction like they would normally. They isolated the steam, they turned off the stir. The operator in charge of the distillation column, though, did not realize that the distillation column now began to act as a reactor at this temperature, which, again, poor reactor design and poor separation design. I missed that. Yeah, poor separation design. So now they all just like shut it down and they went home.
You gotta go home. It's the weekend.
Exactly. And it was part of I don't know, Italy is really chill, I guess. So only maintenance and cleaning crews were left. The abnormally hot upper region of the reactor jacket, then of course, like it splits. The stir wasn't running, so the heating was super localized and it was just there in the upper layers. It wasn't moving around. And that's when they reached that critical temperature that they had seen in testing for the exothermic side reaction. The critical temperature was 180 degrees Celsius that they had seen. Right? And so normally at 180 degrees Celsius, a slow runaway decomposition begins, releasing more heat, causing more rapid runaway reaction. And I know we said runaway reaction a lot. Runaway reaction, I guess in the simple terms, basically, you didn't expect this reaction. It starts to happen inside a reaction and it just keeps going as long as, temperature keeps building. There's no reverse happening with the reaction unless you do something to make that happen. So it reached 230 degrees Celsius up to 7 hours later. Of course, once this happened, the reactor relief valve eventually opened. And it did not shut. I know, valves are supposed to be there in case of emergencies, but it didn't open early enough also. Another design fail. If you're listening at home, you could make a drinking game of this and drink every time I say design fail. And you will be hammered. Anyway, the air release of 6 tons of chemicals is what we got, which settled over just 18 kilometers square. That's 6.9 square miles of the surrounding area. It wasn't even a big cloud, but it was super concentrated. The problem we were worried about in this cloud, of course, is the TCDD, aka the dioxin. 1 kilogram of that dioxin was released. At the nominal reaction temperature in this plant, they usually saw trace amounts of dioxin, but they didn't really worry about that.
So you're telling me even during nominal reaction temperature, there's still TCDD that's being released? And that's cool?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? Again, not super strict on the safety laws, and trace amounts are usually less than 1 part per million, so you're not going to worry about it too much. However, in the higher temperature conditions associated with this runaway reaction, TCDD production reached 166 parts per million or more. I think it's one of those things where you kind of just set a standard that is not harmful, because no process is truly perfect. Although this process is markedly the opposite of perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. The foreman on standby called the deputy head of production when that relief valve started to release gas, because they were like, that is not supposed to be happening. The man's name is Dr. Barney, which I only added because that is so hilarious. Guys, it made me crack up. Okay? So, head of production, Dr. Barney, came over, and to his credit, he showed up immediately, and he told the foreman to begin cooling as quick as he could, because he was trying to stop the escape of the mixture as the reaction began to slow down. He even, later on, they met with county officials in the following weeks, but they did not immediately tell them what the issue was. I'm going to say that. In one of their laboratories, the company laboratories, the existence of dioxin was confirmed within 5 days, but the local government didn't know for 10 days after they confirmed it again at the same laboratory. So due to this delay in the communication, that's actually how surrounding inhabitants were more exposed to dioxin and the damage spread.
So you're telling me the locals were not informed until 10 days later?
So it's tricky, right? It's not like in Bhopal where they were just yeah, fuck the locals, we're out. But in this case, immediately he got there, he tried to contact the local health officer, and he called his office and he was absent, and no one on the phone knew who the deputy was. I don't know what's going on in his health office, but they were like, guys, who's the deputy? And everyone in the office is like, deputy, we don't know. They called them back again and still nothing. So what the company did was they had their technical directors down there within a day. Heads of the main company were down there. They had doctors down there inspecting the site, and they were closing off different aspects of the plant. And they started evacuating people even without telling the government exactly what was happening. But that's the problem, right? They didn't specify exactly what it was, even though they knew it was dioxin 5 days later, but they didn't tell them 10 days later, till 10 days later.
Not even doctors, so they could help treat people. Yeah, kind of sounded like Bhopal, bro.
I mean, they did try to, the difference is that they started evacuating people right away. They started closing down things. The actual technical directors were down there. They weren't just kind of evading the situation. That's the sort of difference here, which is why you don't see like the same kind of injuries or people being affected with the environment and the community. Speaking of the effects of this whole thing, TCP is a skin irritant, but it was not this chemical that caused concern. It was the dioxin, like we've said. And also, I guess, 2378 tetrachlorodibenzo-P dioxin. Guys, oh my God. You do not need to know the full name, okay? Just know that that is the one that was super serious. This compound is part of dioxins. Because, guys, when we say dioxins, there's like a lot of different chemical dioxins. They're not all the same thing. There's different ones, and they have different harm levels. So experts estimate that 7 to 35 pounds, which is 3 to 16 kilograms of dioxins, were released into the atmosphere as a result of the Seveso explosion. People living closest to the plant were evacuated from their homes, and the area was closed off, like I said. But about 5,000 nearby residents were allowed to stay, but they stopped them from raising crops or farm animals because, like I'm going to explain in a little bit, the biggest problem with dioxins is that it doesn't leave. It kind of just sits there. Now, the biggest effects that we saw on people was chloracne, which I know just sounds like, oh, acne, it's not a problem. It is. It's an inflammation of your skin caused by chlorine-based chemicals, which is what dioxins are. And it can cause like extreme skin irritations. Like children can be in a lot of pain, especially. It's not just like a regular rash. And 137 cases of the condition were found again in a follow-up survey 6 months later. Other health problems, not as severe, well, not as predominant, but more severe. About 8% of the exposed population had enlarged livers, and a few residents showed signs of minor nerve damage. But some people claim that exposure, that the women that were exposed had higher rates of miscarriage or deformed children, but no research ever confirmed that to be true. No lives were lost in the accident, thank God. Although the US EPA has classified dioxins as a carcinogen, just because it is a possibility and they've seen testing in animals, there is not sufficient evidence to prove that dioxins cause cancer directly in low levels found in the environment. But if you're like ingesting this, then yes, it would be a carcinogen.
So don't ingest it, even if Trump tells you.
Guys, don't ingest dioxins. As far as the environment, like I said, this is where you see the biggest issue with dioxin, is that it stays in the soil, the surface water, the sediments, the plants, and animal tissue. Dioxin gets formed like when you burn fuels and waste, which is how we see it nowadays, will literally stay in the soil as long as it possibly can. And of course, we have different sources of it. The problem is that they also don't dissolve in water. They will settle to the bottom of water. And so they'll cling to the sediment. And every time like you have any overturn at the bottom of that lake or river or other water source, it will release more dioxins. Because they don't break down in the environment, you can have them years after you stop producing them. In your surface water, they pass into aquatic organisms, so then they end up in the food chain. Which, speaking of organisms and species, approximately 4% of local farm animals died after Seveso, which is about 80,000 animals, which is sad.
That's a lot.
I know. Like, I like human beings. Like, human beings are cool and all. But I just get really sad when animals die, you guys.
Big screaming of privilege, but yes, we all do.
I'm sorry. I know it's a privileged thing to say. I've always been like this. I'm sorry, guys. They had to kill these animals, guys. Like, some of them died naturally, but they had to murder a bunch of them. Because the thing with dioxin is it progresses up the food chain because it stays in your fatty tissue. So like 3,300 of them just died on their own, but 80,000 were murdered. Guys.
They were murdered.
I know.
People. Yes, they were murdered, so you wouldn't die.
I know, but it like super bums me out. Like, yeah. So the effect, I just sounded like, really? What the hell was that? It super bums me out. Anyway, The affected areas were divided and subdivided based on soil contamination. Zone A, which was nearest, was considered like the most contaminated, and that was 110 hectares. And that's where they completely evacuated. And today, they've actually turned it into a park, you guys. It's called the Seveso Oak Forest. And what they did is in that forest, or this park or whatever, they don't let people go into Zone A. But basically underneath all that cover is where they stored the carcasses and all this like discarded waste from everything that happened at this site.
It's a mummified museum of it.
Basically, and it's like covered with like land cover, and you're not supposed to go into the Zone A area. After this, in Zone B and R, the next most contaminated areas, they were like, no more farming, do not eat meat. Like, it took a while, which super bummer that people can, do what was good for their livelihood.
So these are like some really severe damages that we've seen caused by dioxin. And I know that you said that it's a byproduct, but have we come up with some solutions to like maybe minimizing the production of dioxin in all these industrial processes, maybe optimize it?
So dioxins, very similar to PCBs, but two different things, where like people stopped producing both of these things around the same time because it's such an environmentally and medically unsafe thing to have around. It's a contaminant that you see a lot in, of course, the production of some chlorinated organic compounds, and dioxin naturally occurs. Like it happens as a part of some of these reactions, unlike PCBs, which are synthetic, but that's not what we're talking about. You can also see it as part of the side reactions that happen when you're making herbicides like Silvex, so it can occur naturally, like I said. However, it's no longer used as an ingredient for anything in most of the world. It was banned in Europe in 2002 for certain, and in 1979 in the US or most of the world. I should add that like dioxin does exist in many countries' food chains, and sometimes when we burn old plastics at municipal waste sites, we release dioxin. So most people don't produce them anymore, but like burning things will release them. And a lot of your fish in certain waters still has dioxin in its fatty tissue because fish hold them the longest. But anyway, what happened afterwards? Of course, some court cases. In January 1977, an action plan consisting of like scientific analysis, economic aid, medical monitoring, restoration, and decontamination was completed. Shortly after, ICMESA began to pay the first compensations to those affected. Later that spring, decontamination operations were initiated, and in June, a system epidemiological health monitoring for 220,000 people was launched. So like the action that we see here was kind of swift. The chemical plant was shut down, and all of its waste, which was stored in 41 barrels, was earmarked for disposal as nuclear waste. Here is another place where like there's kind of a fuck up in this story.
Another place, haha.
Yeah. So the move resulted in a debacle of international proportions. And actually when they made the Basel Convention, which I know we talked about on the Bamako episode, I can't remember what episode that was. The Basel Convention wasn't just because of other things. Like this was one of the big things that made people start saying like, no, you can't just keep dumping hazardous waste wherever you want. So what happened with this company was that the company contracted the people that were supposed to transport the waste out of the country and store it. But what they did was they said like, yeah, we totally got rid of that waste. We disposed of it environmentally safe. Like it's so good. Never mind. But then later it came out that they had just hidden it in a village in northern France. So that was the whole thing. And then the Roche Group, the parent company, had to undertake to, like, they were like, you know what? We'll take care of it. We will personally dispose of it. And in 1992, a long time after, they declared that they had incinerated the waste in Switzerland. People were like, no, they did not. But the company was eventually cleared in 1994 by an environmental commission that investigated the claims. So that was a little drama from that. As far as arrests go, because we love those, 5 former employees of the company were initially sentenced to prison. However, after several appeals, only 2 of them were found guilty of criminal negligence, and their sentences were suspended for the others. A little sad fact, but like, I don't know, is it? In February 1980, ICMESA's production boss, Paolo Paoletti, was assassinated by a member of the radical Marxist-Leninist Italian terrorist group, Prima Unea, as part of the violent campaign against uncaring capitalism.
You know, usually I would say serves them right, but no, bro, it is not. Like, that's terrorism. Let's be real.
Yeah, I was like, that's terrorism. And also, like, the person they assassinated was not any of the big wigs at the top. You know what I mean? I don't know. That just seems like extreme, but like, I don't know if I'm sad. I don't know. Anyway, as far as compensation that was paid to all those people we mentioned, Givaudan, which was the Swiss group under the Roche group, paid 300 million Swiss francs in compensation to the residents and in decontamination costs. So, what did this lead to as far as like the future? Like I said, there's that weird oak forest thing, which is just interesting to me. But you can't really like go on it. They won't let you go on it. It's in one of those sarcophagi things that they have at Chernobyl. And after this in Europe, the whole thing led to the adoption of the Seveso directive, which has been amended twice afterwards as they learned lessons from things like Bhopal, Toulouse, and Enschede. And then they had the Seveso II directive. And I don't know what happened before 2012, but they had the Seveso III directive. Oh yeah, that was because they were looking at union legislation as far as the classification of chemicals and the rights for citizens to have information and justice. And what they've tried to do with the Seveso directive is integrate it into like other EU policies so they don't have double regulation or administrative burden. You can see it in like their security union agenda and the union civil protection mechanism. All these environmental things, there's like a bunch of other ones, came into play because of Seveso, Italy. Even though nobody died, it really was one of the most impactful environmental disasters ever.
Yeah, as long as we get policies out of it, and it really did change the way that the world looked at dioxin. So I'd say it was a big thing.
Yeah.
So that wraps up our episode. Ala, we see industrial blunder after blunder, and we've seen them lead to damages on such a large scale, right? Do you think that in these modern times we have better standards and oversight, or are we still expecting disasters like these to keep happening?
So I know that we will see leaks and we will see some things. I think like Italy had a leak, 2 months ago at a chemical plant. But overall, we are way better off because now if your company does something like this, the crackdown is swift and immediate. Before you build processes, you're checking it. I mean, most of the stuff we talk about happened from the 50s to the 90s. It's not really something that is as big a problem now. And of course, we have like big legislation and big treaties, really, like the Basel Convention, which makes transatlantic transfer of hazardous waste a little harder. Although, like we talked about on the show before, not impossible. So yeah, things have definitely come a long way. I don't think we would get another Bhopal in 2021. And if we did get another Bhopal in 2021, that many people wouldn't die, I feel.
Yeah, and plus, like, we really hope that people have learned from their mistakes so we don't get another Bhopal. And this time, people just don't escape. But for the audience, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that when such a massive company, right, like Hoffman La Roche, like she said, was a massive company, it's a multi-million-dollar company. Do you think that when such a massive company makes such an error on this scale, they should be allowed to keep operating with business as usual in other parts of the world? Because it's not just one factory that they usually have, right? They have other industries set up. Do you think they should keep going, or do you think that all of their factories and all of their industries should be investigated? Please let us know, because we would love to find out what you guys think about it. Talking about an organization related to chemical and factory safety in Italy, I'm going to be talking about the ISPRA, which I would try and say it, but really no, it's in Italian, so I'm not even gonna. They work with numerous European and international environmental, scientific, and technical institutes and organizations so that they can implement their institutional mandate, and they work in cooperation with the Ministry for the Environment, Land and Sea, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry, and the Ministry of Education, University and Research. Be sure to check them out. We'll put them on our show notes. And that is our show. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything we talked about today. Email us, leave us a voicemail, rate and review us. Please do respond to our audience question. We love to hear from you. Any feedback. Chemical disasters are clearly something we care about, so let us know whatever you know in that department. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. Check out our YouTube page if you need captions as you listen. Stay safe and dry, and until next time, keep learning, pals!